Now, how'd you move around the United States?
What we would do is we would usually fly to a particular region, and then from that region kind of decamp there for a few weeks and then drive out. So we would go to Northern California, fly, say, to San Francisco, fan out from San Francisco for a few weeks. Some portion of it I did by myself. Los Angeles I did by myself. Seattle I did by myself.
How old was your daughter, your first daughter, when you
She started the road show when she was 2.
How old? What's her name?
Sophie.
You now have another one.
Eliza.
And she was on this trip at some point?
She came into the picture in 1999, so she missed some of the early stages of the trip, and ended up taking some of the later stages in 99 and early 2000.
How many people did you talk to?
Oh boy. Face-to-face interviews was well over 300. I also did a number of phone interviews. I have a website, freeagentnation.com, where I did an online census also of free agents. So I had about over 1,100 people who filled out a kind of a mock census about how they operated their lives.
Name one person that you talked to that you thought was interesting and tell us why.
Betty Fox. Betty Fox
Grandma Betty?
Grandma Betty. Also known as GrandmaBetty.com. Grandma Betty is now a 70-year-old woman. When I met her, she was 68 years old, and at the age of 67, she found herself in a really serious predicament. Betty Fox was widowed at a very young age, in her early 30s. And this is at the time that Betty Friedan, another Betty from New York, was urging women to seize the workforce. But Betty Fox found herself getting seized by the workforce. She was widowed, she had 2 sons to raise, and so she took a series of jobs. The jobs were not high-level, high-paying jobs, and she would end up losing a job here and there, not because of her performance, but because a company would go under. And so finally, at age 67, this woman, 67-year-old woman in Bayside, Queens, her company moves too far away for her to commute, and so here she is, out of work, no pension, and a long time to live on this earth. And so what she did is her son Marty was a bank technology officer. He hooked her up with something called Web TV, which allows people to surf the internet using their television set. And before long, Betty started looking around, and she said, wow, there's some really interesting material out here, particularly for older Americans like me. But it's a mess. It's poorly organized. It's hard to find things. So she started organizing it herself. Her son got her a domain, that is GrandmaBetty.com. She started organizing her sites, and before long, people started coming. She started getting emails about how to make peanut brittle, where to solve certain health problems, where to buy certain kinds of clothing. And she would dutifully, in her Queens living room, answer all these emails. And before long, almost unbeknownst to herself, she had created what the internet gurus call a portal. And before long, she started getting advertising and affiliate relationships. And so here's this woman who went from having no job and having a somewhat bleak set of circumstances to using the internet and using her own gumption to establish a presence on the web. And at the end of the book, I talk about Grandma Betty was eventually acquired. She had these venture-backed internet companies come to her apartment in Bayside, Queens, and sit across from her, just as you and I are sitting right now, and say, Grandma Betty, we want to buy you out. And she drove a very hard bargain and remained, she ended up taking a nice deal with a company called iGrandparents, but remained a free agent, still alive, still working out of her living room in Bayside, Queens.
So many of these .coms have failed. Does this group make it?
The free agents?
Yeah.
Oh, sure, because the free agents were not. The free agents had less exposure. Betty Fox is making it great. The .coms that failed ended up burning through, as everybody knows, tens of millions of dollars of venture capital. Free agents, if you work for yourself, you have to make a profit almost from day one. And if you don't make a profit from day one, you're in big trouble.
Name another person and tell us a story.
Another person who I really enjoyed was a woman named Deborah Reese, who is in Northern California. She worked at a number of high-tech firms, Apple Computer, probably the most prominent, and eventually tired of it. And it was interesting, one of the things that had her make the break, and I heard this repeatedly in a lot of interviews, and it really surprised me, the frequency that it was mentioned, was she ended up leaving because of ethical disagreements with the company. And that really surprised me in a lot of these interviews. People said, well, you know, the reason I left was I was asked to do something I didn't think was quite right. And so there's a sense that people want a greater freedom of conscience in their work than they are able to get. But anyway, Deb Reese left her job and ended up working as a marketing consultant for herself. She subsequently adopted 2 children from Cambodia, so she's a single mom, free agent, and she has this one interesting element, one interesting part of her story where she decided to buy a house. And the bank said to her, "We're not going to give you a mortgage. You don't have a job." And she said, "Wait a second. I'm here in Silicon Valley where companies come and go, you know, like the sun. And you're telling me that you're not going to give me a loan because I don't have a job? Listen, I've got 6 clients." And so she shows her clients, "I've got 6 clients. If one of these clients goes away, I'm going to still make my payments. But if I'm working at Webvan, say, and Webvan disappears, you're not going to get your payments." And so she tried to convince this bank loan officer that she was actually a safer risk working for herself than she would have been holding a job. And I think that right there says a lot about how work and risk have changed in America.
How would you contact somebody in your survey?
Well, it's an interesting question. It's a very aggressive reporting job. I would use contacts and contacts of contacts. I don't know how I could have reported this book without email. So what I would do is I would send out an email to contacts in a particular region saying, "I'm going to do this reporting, anybody who I should talk to." I'd get a few more emails back. I would ask them questions as well.
What were you looking for?
I was looking for a wide variety of experience and backgrounds. People who had just started, people who had always been doing it.
But they had to be free agents?
Yes. Yeah.
So you only interviewed free agents?
Yes, absolutely. Because I was taking a census of free agent nation. I didn't interview, well, I interviewed a couple of people who were contemplating going into free agency, but I wanted to get a picture for the universe of people who were working for themselves.
Tell me everything that a free agent has to be. What are they?
In terms of their attributes?
Yeah, I mean, what would make me a free agent? What would you have to be?
Well, you would have to be working for yourself. You would have to be largely untethered from a large organization and not dependent on an institution or an employer. So again, one of the interesting things here is the term free agent is an imperfect term. And in some sense, it's modeled after the term the organization man, which came out in William White's book in the 1950s. And what he said is, when he described the organization man in his book, he said, "I use this term, I can think of no other better way to describe the people I'm talking about." And that's what I feel with free agents. I can think of no other term to describe the people I'm talking about. So there isn't, say, a pure scientific definition of who's a free agent and who's not. But people, and even people in the traditional world of work, often think of themselves as free agents. But what I focused on in my interviews and in my census was people who worked for themselves.
Who was William White?
William White was a fabulous journalist at mostly at Fortune magazine in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, who ended up using journalism as a form of just incredibly insightful sociology. And so he wrote the book, The Organization Man. He also did some really fascinating studies where he would he studied where corporations located and made the incredible finding that the main decision about where a company's headquarters was proximity to the CEO's home. He also spent some time literally standing on the streets of New York watching how people interacted. So he was kind of an anthropologist, sociologist, journalist, just a remarkable, he died about 2 years ago, a remarkable figure in American journalism.
Did you meet him?
No, I didn't. I didn't. He passed away, as I said, about 2 years ago.
How successful was the book, The Organization Man?
The book did very well. The book was kind of a surprise bestseller because it was a little bit on the academic side, even though it was written by a journalist. And it's really endured over the years. I mean, you and I can have a conversation about The Organization Man, and you can say the phrase and people can nod and know what you're talking about because that term has become such a part of our vocabulary.
You say in your book that managers are toast.
I agree with that. And I'm glad I do because I wrote it. Why are managers toast? Well, I tend to think of most managers at most companies sort of subscribe to the vice principal school of management. That is, they act almost as vice principals of the workplace. Their job is to get people in trouble, to watch what people are doing, to give people detentions, to give people hall passes. And I think that way of working, that way of managing is fundamentally flawed and outdated. Most workers are self-motivated. Most workers, talented workers especially, need organizations much less than organizations need talented workers. So I think that the manager of the future is a very different kind of figure. Someone who is a very astute judge of talent, someone who is able to marshal talent for the particular task, someone who operates, sort of my model for this is a combination of Phil Jackson, the great LA Lakers basketball coach, Penny Marshall, who was an actress and a writer and a director in Hollywood, and Steve Rebell, the guy who founded Studio 54, who became a great party giver. So it's someone who can attract talent, assemble them for a particular task, really understand the idiosyncrasies of individual talent, and get the most out of them.
Will you be a free agent in 20 years?
I think so. I think so. We can do this show again in 20 years and we can find out. But I think so. It's hard. Now, again, there are certain, you know, there's this, you write a book like Free Agent Nation and use the terminology of free agency and describe this world as a nation and people declaring their independence. And it's somewhat misleading, because it's not as if you become a free agent, that is, if you leave corporate America to go to Free Agent Nation, it's the same as leaving Cuba and swimming to Florida and you have to turn around and denounce Castro. It's less stark than that. I think more and more people in the workforce, and this might even be the most profound change, are essentially going to hold dual passports, one in Free Agent Nation, one in corporate America, and migrate back and forth between the two. Now, in the days of the organization, man, that was impossible. If you left an organization and said to your boss, oh, you know what, I think I'm going to try to make it on my own for a few years, and then came back 5 years later and said, oh, I'm ready to come back, there's no way they would have taken you. But today, corporate employers are recognizing that a stint in self-employment makes a worker extremely valuable.
Columbus, Ohio, your hometown.
Yes.
You met your wife at Yale. Where were you before Yale?
I graduated from Northwestern University.
In what subject?
In linguistics, of course.
Linguistics?
Yes.
Why were you studying it?
Linguistics is a fascinating topic, and in a way, language is at the juncture of both the science and the humanities. So I ended up taking both a lot on courses in poetry, but also courses in the circuitry of the brain. So to me, linguistics was a quintessential liberal arts discipline.
What were your parents doing? Are they still active? Are they still busy?
Yes.
What do they
My
do?
father's a free agent. He was actually an organization man for many years. He's a chemist. He worked for a quarter of a century for a large research organization connected to Ohio State University. My mother was a school teacher. Now she works doing social service programs for older people.
What year did you graduate from Northwestern?
86.
And from Yale Law School?
91.
So what happened then?
Well, I graduated from college. I ended up working here in Washington for one of Ralph Nader's groups, a pretty interesting group that organized buyers of heating oil to exercise greater leverage in the marketplace. I actually started law school and left because I didn't like it, and ended up going to India for a while too.
What did you do in India?
I traveled around. I also worked for a legal aid organization. You can live, in the mid-1980s, you could live pretty cheaply in India. He was a single man in his early 20s.
How did you get involved with Ralph Nader?
Through contacts of contacts. I didn't work directly with Nader. I worked for one of his constellation of groups.
Doing what?
I did media and outreach, trying to get people to join this cluster of consumers who exercise their power in the marketplace.
First politician you worked for?
First politician I worked for was a guy named Sherrod Brown, who is now a congressman from Ohio. He was used to be Ohio's Secretary of State. He actually was elected Ohio's Secretary of State when he was probably 8 years younger than I am right now, and worked writing speeches for him.
And then other campaigns you worked on?
Well, two most prominent figures would be President Bob Kerrey and Senator Geraldine Ferraro. I worked on Bob Kerrey's presidential campaign in 1992. I also worked on Geraldine Ferraro's Senate race. Those are the two most prominent politicians for whom I've worked.
In the middle of your book, you find yourself in Terre Haute, Indiana.
Right.
And you find yourself in the Eugene V. Debs home and at the Larry Bird Motel.
Mm-hmm.
But out of that, I mean, what I'm getting at is this whole business of where you are politically and the union part of this. Mm-hmm. And you've discovered something there.
Yeah.
What was it?
Yeah. Well, what I discovered is, I think that traditional labor unions, particularly industrial labor unions, have become passé. They've become ineffective, and I don't think they're necessarily that great for workers. But I don't think that unions are dead. In fact, I think free agency could trigger a rather robust union movement. But the unions I'm talking about are more of the crafts unions, the building trades unions, the entertainment industry unions. And what I think is going to happen is that smart unions are going to recognize that, hey, you know what, we're becoming more and more a free agent economy. The idea that you can negotiate 10-year collective bargaining agreements, 5-year collective bargaining agreements with large employers, it just doesn't work. What unions need to do, and what many workers in this economy are crying out for, are a place to learn new skills, a place to get health insurance and other types of benefits, a place to meet other people in your profession. And so that's what the building trades unions do. That's what the entertainment unions do. To a large extent, that's what the sports unions do. And so what I sort of had this moment in Terre Haute, Indiana, of all places, having visited the Eugene V. Debs home, this great labor leader who ran for president, and also staying at the Larry Bird Motel. Larry Bird went to college in Terre Haute, Indiana. In professional basketball labor negotiations, there's something called a Larry Bird exception, where teams, in the NBA, there's a salary cap. Teams can only pay a certain amount of money for all their players. If they want to hire a free agent, they can't bust that salary cap. But they can keep one of their own players and bust the salary cap. That's known as the Larry Bird exception. And what I realize is that more and more work is actually becoming this kind of AFL-CIO, NBA type arrangement. So that I think the unions of the future, the worker groups of the future, are going to be very much like the sports unions. That is, they're going to have a union that sets a minimum, maybe a salary minimum, basic working conditions, and then beyond that, people are going to be represented by agents. More and more, something like 5% of workers who earn more than $75,000 a year are represented by talent agents.
What did you learn at the Eugene V. Debs home?
Oh, I learned that, you know, the idea that this notion that the economy is changing and someone needs to represent workers is obviously an enduring American tradition, and it expresses itself in fundamentally different ways.
Had you paid much attention to him, by the way, in history before you got there?
Not significantly. You know, there's not much to do in Terre Haute, so, you know, there are only really 2 big sites to see, and I just sort of inadvertently made this connection.
But he ran for president, what, 5 or 6 times?
Yeah, a few times. He was in prison for a while.
Released by Warren G. Harding, I believe.
I think so, yeah.
Pardoned and all that, but was involved in the railroads. Could that duplicate itself? The kind of world we had back when he was involved in the labor movement?
I don't think so. I think but again, that sort of labor activism arose because of the circumstances of the underlying economy, and I think that a new sort of labor movement could emerge based on the circumstances of this economy. So what workers really need to do, no workers expect lifetime employment at a single company. But what I think workers do demand and what they want are valuable places to work, interesting places to work, benefits, it's a big issue, healthcare benefits, retirement benefits, and a way to learn new skills. Because today, you learn some skills for a job, it's not like you can do it for 30 years. You have to constantly sharpen your skills, and workers are looking for a venue to do that.
Okay, go back. You're in '98 and part of '99. You're traveling around. What's your wife thinking about all this? Does she like this, traveling around? And
I think so. I think she likes it.
Did she help you in any way?
She helped me by taking our daughter to the zoo so I could do my interviews, and my wife was just an incredible sounding board for a lot of these ideas. My wife is a much more rigorous thinker than I am. You know, in law school, I was in the portion of the class that made the top 90% possible, and she was someone who was getting straight A's through college, straight A's through law school, and has a very keen left-brain sense of what's a strong argument and what's not. And so I could not make an argument. I could not run an argument past her and without it getting significantly sharpened in the course of our conversation.
Has it dawned on you that Bill Clinton's 55 years old and he and his wife went to Yale and met at Yale, and there you are, 37, you met your wife at Yale?
Yeah, I think it's dawned on me. I mean, his book deal was much more lucrative than mine.
But what was the circumstances when you met her?
I was in the class ahead of her, and...
Isn't that about the same situation?
You know, I'm not sure. I never really looked at the Clintons as a model for my romantic life.
Well, the reason I mentioned this is because you're obviously interested in politics, but you then talk about Bill Clinton as being the just-in-time politician of this age. Yeah. What does that mean, just-in-time politics?
Just-in-time. In order to understand it, we have to take a step backward. American manufacturing rehabilitated itself in the early 1990s through a practice called just-in-time manufacturing. It used to be that companies would make a whole bunch of a product, stick it in a warehouse, and have these huge inventory of products and wait for customers to order them. And we would go into recessions when you had a big inventory overhang. Now, in part, that's what's happening right now in the economy. We have excess inventory. So just-in-time manufacturing has not been the perfect panacea for American manufacturing. But a company like Dell Computer is a good example. Dell's inventory is only about a day. So if someone takes an order from Dell, Dell goes out and gets the parts, assembles the particular computer that the consumer wants, ships it to them. I think that our politics are moving in that direction, have moved in that direction. The task of political leaders used to be to maintain a coalition. Democrats had racial minorities, environmentalists, and labor unions. Republicans had big business, social conservatives. And the goal of the leaders of these parties was to keep this big coalition intact, to make sure nobody fell off the wagon. And in a sense, it's basically making sure you have a giant inventory of voters and constituents. But because of disenchantment with politics, because of the rise of independent voters, because of some changes in the economy, it's no longer possible for most parties to maintain these giant inventories of supporters. So effective leaders, smart leaders, practice what I call just-in-time politics. They assemble the right coalition for the right task. And we see that, and I think Bill Clinton was a master at this. Bill Clinton, I think, understood this. He didn't call it that, of course. I think he understood that, and I think he was masterfully skilled at doing that. So you take something like the '93 budget agreement, passed with one vote in the House, one vote in the Senate. We had this, and it was a strange coalition of people who voted for that. Although that one was mostly Democrats, but it was a particular coalition. Then he passes NAFTA. Well, organized labor leaves him. Environmentalists leave him, but he does a coalition of free market thinkers, of Republicans, and fashions another coalition, wins by one vote. And the coverage of it had this kind of perils of Pauline quality. Can Bill Clinton do it? Is he going to get the votes? Can he summon the will of all these people and pass this thing? And there was a lot of the commentary was, oh, he's not an effective leader. Look, he has these perils of Pauline travails in order to pass legislation. But to my mind, that was very much like in these days of waning party loyalty, of an even split in the parties, of very strong special interest groups. That would have been like some securities analyst saying, can Dell get Brian Lamb his computer? It only has 1 day of parts. Can it get the CPU? Can it get the screen? Oh my gosh, it shipped the product. And so I think our politics now, especially right now, where the Senate and the House are basically split, where the last election was essentially a tie, that our politics are really just-in-time politics, and Bill Clinton is a true master of that.
Does Al Gore practice just-in-time politics?
I mean, I think if Al Gore were elected president, he would have had to. I think any smart leader has to do that in order to get their legislation to get anything through. I mean, we have essentially a dead split in this country politically. And I also think that a lot of the alignment of voters and of special interests and of interest groups is no longer permanent. I mean, Virginia Pastrell in her book, The Future and Its Enemies, talks about dynamists and stasis as a dividing line in how political thinkers and political groups are operating.
But I'm glad you brought up Virginia Pastrell because she endorses your book.
Right.
She's Reason Magazine. She's a libertarian. Right. But you also have Tom Peters who gives you the best book on work life since William H. White. What'd that cost you?
Cost me sending him a manuscript.
Steve Kay says Free Agent Nation is the shape of things to come in the internet century. What'd that cost you?
You know what? These blurbs are free.
Do you know these folks?
Well, I know Virginia Pastrell. I mean, I met Virginia Pastrell in the course of doing my reporting. I'd actually written a couple of speeches for Steve Case. Tom Peters, I had met maybe once in my life.
Naomi Wolf,
yeah,
the woman the Alpha Beta woman that advised Al Gore. She says a groundbreaking book, a readable and persuasive benchmark.
And that's partly because women are playing such a prominent role in the free agent economy.
How so?
Well, first of all, women are becoming self-employed at 12 times the rate of men. There are a lot of women out there in the workforce who are hitting a glass ceiling, and not being able to make it to the upper ranks of corporations, and they figured they'd be better off on their own. But there are also a lot of women who don't even hit the glass ceiling, who look up there and say, man, I don't want to be there anyway. So they're finding that the best way to navigate their work lives is to go out on their own. And women, for a whole set of reasons, tend to be extremely effective free agents.
Do you consider yourself a Democrat?
I'm a registered Democrat. I live in the District of Columbia. I'm a registered Democrat.
The reason I ask is because Virginia Pastrell and Naomi Wolf and all these different names. And where is this heading in politics? So because your survey, your online survey, and all tilted more, the people that answered are more Democratic than Republican, you say?
Yeah, in the survey, right.
Is this a Republican-Democratic split, or free agents Democrats?
I don't think that either party really understands this. I mean, I think that Democrats tend to look at free agents as people who are being cast out into this perilous world of work by evil corporations, and Republicans tend to think of self-employed people as modern-day Babbitts who don't believe in any role in government, who don't believe in any kind of form of social justice, and I think both are fundamentally misguided. I'll give you an example. You know, today in America, fewer than 1 out of 10 workers in the private sector belongs to a labor union. Fewer than 1 out of 10 workers works for a Fortune 500 company. Yet our politics, national politics especially, are this pitched battle between big business and big labor, when most Americans have a rather scant connection to either group.
I almost took you up on your offer in this book. I think you may know what I'm talking about, because I read a book a week. You're going to make it easy for people like me. I didn't, but and that is that you have a technique in here, and I've basically earmarked all of them, where you got 1 page on each chapter that can kind of tell you everything.
Yeah.
Why'd you do that?
I respect people's time. What I'm asking people as an author is to make a very significant commitment to me. They don't know me. They have to hear about the book, and they have to make a significant commitment. They have to pay $17, $18 for the book, and they have to spend perhaps 6 or 7 hours reading it. That's a significant commitment for people to make. So I want to make it as easy for them as possible. So what I've done at the end of every chapter was fashion something that I call the box. The box has 4 elements to it. One element is what I call the crux, which explains the point of the chapter in about 150 words or fewer. There's also an entry called the factoid, which is one startling factoid from the chapter. There's a section called the quote, which offers one representative quote from the chapter. And there's an entry called the word. In every chapter, because the work is changing so fast and our vocabulary is racing to catch up with it, there are many new words, some of which I've tried to coin myself, that this new world of work has spawned. So I like to offer a little vocabulary word in every chapter. So the point is, someone who wants to read this book might not want to read every single chapter. They can look at the box, get the gist of it, and move on. Other people who want to come back to it, a lot of readers who've emailed me have told me that they like the box, so they can, if they forget something, they can come back to it and be reminded of it.
Can people get to you on email now if they're watching this show?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. On the book jacket, I invite readers to email me. My email address is dan@freeagentnation.com. I answer every email from every reader. Again, if you're a writer, people are making, I'm so grateful anytime anybody reads anything that I write, anytime anybody picks up anything that I write, because they are investing their time and their brain power in hearing what I have to say. And I'm firmly committed to hearing what they have to say too and responding to them.
Dan@freeagentnation.com. All right, I'm going to go through and pick out some factoids and see what you say about them. Here's the factoid in the first chapter. The largest private employer in the United States is not Detroit's General Motors or Ford or even Seattle's Microsoft or Amazon.com, but Milwaukee's Manpower Incorporated, a temp agency. How big is it?
It has 1,100 offices. It employs more workers than any other corporation in America today. That is a remarkable change.
Why?
Why is it a remarkable change, or why do they do it?
Yeah, why is it a remarkable change?
Well, because it used to be that someone could go to General Motors and work there for 30 years. General Motors would have this incredible roster of fixed talent and employees and would just be this behemoth. And now, essentially, what many people are doing is working for Manpower. That is, they get a W-2, the paycheck and tax form from Manpower, and are the employer of Manpower, but actually do assignments at other places.
11,000 offices.
1,100.
I'm sorry, 1,100 offices, and that's the largest employer in the United States.
Yes.
How many?
I think it's upwards of 1 million.
Factoid from Chapter 2. 2 out of 3 workers in California do not hold traditional jobs. The permanent, year-round, full-time, outside the home employment arrangement that is the basis of nearly all American labor laws and social assumptions. Why only in California?
Well, because that's where the study came out of. The study was from the University of San Francisco, and it looked at how many people in California have the kind of job where you leave the house in the morning, go to work somewhere else, work for someone else, do it full-time year-round. Essentially, the kind of job on which our social assumptions are based, our health insurance system is based, and in California, only 1 out of 3 workers works that way, which is remarkable when you think about how our tax system is girded to this way of working, our health insurance system is girded to this way of working. Even our transportation systems are based on the idea that this is the norm of how people work. And California has been on the edge of basically every trend in the last 40 years. So if 2 out of 3 workers in California have so-called non-traditional jobs, to me that's a warning sign for the rest of the country.
Factoid in the 3rd chapter, 85% of Americans today were not alive during the Great Depression, which means most of the country lacks any conscious recollection of widespread economic privation.
Yeah. The significance of that, I think, is quite interesting. The default assumption of work in this country, I think, has changed. It used to be that the default assumption, say in my grandfather's day, was the fear of privation, because the Great Depression was widespread economic privation that reached deep into the middle class. But now, 7 out of 8 people in this country weren't alive during the Great Depression. They have no conscious recollection of widespread economic privation. I underscore that word privation because recessions, even though they're painful, are not privation, or long gas lines are not privation. And so I think that more and more people today, because of the incredible prosperity in this country, a country where 2 out of 3 people own the homes they live in, is making people seek from their work not only money but meaning.
Factoid in Chapter 4, a 1999 Lou Harris survey of 1,000 self-employed Americans and small entrepreneurs found that money was not their top motivator. 9 out of 10 respondents said that, quote, setting their own priorities and independence influenced their decision most to go out on their own. Is that your situation?
Oh, sure. And actually, to me, that was one of the biggest surprises in doing these interviews, in doing these interviews around the country, and that survey simply confirms a lot of what I found. I thought when I started researching this and interviewing people, that this was a big, kind of hard-headed economic story, that people were being cast to the periphery by the inexorable forces of information age capitalism. And that wasn't really what I found. People were making very private decisions based on much touchier, feelier values of authenticity, of freedom, and almost nobody mentioned money. Not that free agents don't want to make money, but working this way is hard enough that people don't necessarily do it to get rich.
Who was the most, and I got to be careful what modifier I use, who's the most unusual person you interviewed? Or unusual situation?
One of them was a guy who is named Bob Milbourne, who's in San Francisco, who came of age in the days of the organization man and was so miserable in his company and was so fearful in his company, which was going through downsizings, that he asked to be fired. He went into his boss and said, please fire me.
What, do you want the severance?
He actually wanted the relief from the anxiety of being scared of being fired. He wanted simply the punctuation mark at the end of this part of his career.
What did he do then?
He ended up going out on his own as a free agent, not necessarily, struggling a little bit, but recognized that this world of working at a big bank, was not for him. But he lacked somehow the gumption to leap, and so he asked to be pushed.
How many states did you go to, do you think?
I think it was 24, so about half.
Is there any part of the country you didn't go to?
Well, I didn't go to Alaska and Hawaii. I didn't go to some of the big states in the Great Plains, Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, and the Dakotas. But most of the East Coast, most of the West Coast, a big portion of the Southwest, a big portion of the Midwest.
Did you get a sense that some parts of the country were happier than others?
I don't know about happier. I think that in the center of the country, this form of work is slightly more exotic than on the coast. Seattle and LA and San Francisco, you go into any Starbucks coffee shop and there are a zillion people sitting around punching on their laptops. Same is true in New York and even here in Washington, D.C. In the Midwest, I think that there are pockets where the free agent workforce is more robust. Minneapolis is a good example. Chicago is a good example. But in some other places, it's slightly more exotic.
Factoid in Chapter 5. More than half of American households now own stocks, up from only 1 in 5 households in 1983. In 2000, shareholders outnumbered voters. More citizens own stock than cast a ballot for the President of the United States.
Right. I think that, we were talking about the politics before, I think that is a remarkable fact right there, that we have more shareholders than voters in this country. And what that does, the point of that is to show that people are have learned an enormous amount about the stock market, particularly about the values of diversification. So free agents are saying, why should I invest, if I wouldn't invest all of my financial capital in a single company, why should I invest all of my human capital in a single company by working for only one employer? I'm better off, like as Deb Reese was, I'm better off with a portfolio of clients and assignments and projects than I am with a single employer. I'm diversified.
Chapter 6, factoid: Americans work 350 hours more per year than Europeans and 70 hours more per year than even the Japanese, whose language contains a word, karoshi, that means death from overwork.
Well, that chapter, chapter 6, I tried to figure out how free agents use their time. And what I did is I asked about 50 people to keep time diaries for a whole week, to tell me everything they did during every half-hour increment of the day, to try to get a sense of how people navigated the time element of their life. And what I found is that free agents work about the same number of aggregate hours as your traditional worker, roughly 41 hours, but they apportion their time in wildly different ways, very idiosyncratic, personalized way. And you know, I think that the issue of time and working hours is something that this country is trying to figure out right now, because we do work many more hours than Japanese work, and certainly more than the Europeans work.
Why do we?
I think it's a mix of reasons. I think for some people, it's simply necessary to get ahead. If you have a low hourly wage, you have to work more hours in order to make a living for your family. But I also think that at the other side of the labor market, there's something more intriguing going on, which is that many people like to work. They work not only to earn a living, they don't necessarily it's no longer the days that everybody goes to the factory, tries to get over with their job, watches the clock all day, tries to get done with their task as quickly as possible so they can go home. But I think people get a lot of satisfaction out of work. And so if you enjoy something, as I enjoy my work, as many free agents enjoy their work, you actually want to work a little bit more. So I think it's a kind of a curious mix of factors.
Have you thought of politics yourself?
Well, I worked in politics, and that experience was enough for me to swear off of it for a while. Probably forever, yeah.
You don't think you could ever run for office?
Oh, no.
Why not? What did you see up close that the average person can't?
It's a very, very tough life. Your private life is incredibly exposed. And I think that politics pressures people to say things that they don't necessarily deeply believe. And that troubled me a lot. Whereas if you write for yourself, you can say what you think and take the consequences. I also think that that politics is not that government is not necessarily the most effective way to get things done. If you work in the executive branch of the government, you come in thinking, okay, we can do all kinds of great things, we can change everything. And after a few years, you think, oh my gosh, it's a wonder that anything is accomplished.
You worked for Robert Reich, the former Labor Secretary, and Al Gore, but you saw the Bill Clinton operation up close.
Sure.
What's the deal between Robert Reich and Bill Clinton? Why do they not, I mean, what you hear a lot of criticism about Robert Reich. What's that all about? I mean, what did you see up close? Why was Robert Reich?
Well, I worked for Bob Reich in the early to mid 1990s, and their relationship seemed fine. I have no idea what's going on between them. Neither one has let me in on that secret.
Well, I just wondered if Robert Reich was, when he got out, whether or not he was discouraged by what he had seen happen when he saw what actually happens up close with politics.
Maybe. I mean, his book, his very entertaining book, Locked in the Cabinet, talks about some of that.
All right, factoid, Chapter 7, one of the earliest self-organized clusters of free agents, Benjamin Franklin's Junto, formed in 1727, created a subscription library for its members, which in turn became the first public library in America. Why is that in this?
Yeah. Well, one of the intriguing things that I found was you have this notion if people are working for themselves, they're isolated and lonely, they're stuck in their home offices, working by themselves. And what I found is that many, many independent workers are fashioning these very small groups that meet once a month to talk about business, to talk about life. They're sort of one part board of directors, one part group therapy. And I found this absolutely fascinating, these kind of self-organized tiny groups of people who are meeting regularly. And then I started doing some more research, and I realized, as always, there's nothing new under the sun, that Benjamin Franklin in 1727 started the very same kind of group that lasted, I think, for 40 years and became, as you said, the basis for the first subscription library. And it was a group of free agents. It was small merchants who would meet once a week above an ale house in Philadelphia to talk about work. And Franklin would assign each member, one particular member, to write an essay about a topic of the day, and they would discuss it. So this idea that Americans, free agency, I think, is a very, very quintessentially American phenomenon. Americans have this incredible capacity to form small groups, whether it's Bible study groups, whether it's support groups for disease, or whether it's these new small groups for work.
All right, factoid chapter 8. In sociologist Mark Granovetter's classic study of how people find jobs, he discovered that most people found them through contacts.
Yeah, not through people who they were very close to. That is, well, the people found, most people find jobs not through classified ads or through internet job sites, but through contacts. And most of the contacts that are most valuable, he found, were not the strong ties, not your wife finds you a job or your son finds you a job, but weak ties, 1 or 2 degrees of separation away, because those weak ties allow you entree into worlds that you don't necessarily know. So in his study, he found that most men found his study of workers in Boston, most found their jobs through contacts, but not through close contacts, through somewhat distant contacts.
What impact does that have on us?
Oh, well, free agency, he described in I think, very beautiful terms the difference between strong ties, that is, say, your spouse, or weak ties, someone who you don't know that well. And he found that what he called the strength of weak ties, that weak ties allowed you incredible mobility and entrees to new opportunities. And I find that the free agent economy depends very significantly on weak ties. Someone's social safety net is their network of contacts, and often the most valuable contacts are contacts that are 1 or 2 degrees of separation away.
Chapter 10, factoid, more than 5% of workers who earn more than $75,000 per year now have agents to negotiate their employment contract.
Right. Well, this goes to the Larry Bird, Eugene V. Debs point, that that more and more workers at the high end of the talent market want to be able to negotiate the best possible deal, and they're hiring people to do the negotiation for them. It used to be only athletes and actors would have agents, authors as well, but now more and more workers have them.
How many agents do you have in your life?
2.
And they are? What do they do?
Well, I have a literary agent, Rafe Segallen, terrific literary agent, and I also have an agent who represents me for speaking gigs, David Lavin, who's based in Toronto, Canada.
And out of all this, have you gotten speaking engagements?
Yeah, a few.
What do you think of that?
I'm a writer. I'm not a you know, a dog and pony show giver.
But as a free agent, where's this all headed for you?
Oh, I'm just hoping to continue to write books and have interesting conversations about fascinating topics and earn enough money to support my family.
What's your wife doing now? Is she back to work?
No, she's still at home with her kids.
But you did tell a story. I think I understood you to tell a story about how you got medical insurance.
Right.
Because you had to, what, employ her?
No, although it's possible, actually there are a number of people who are free agents who are taking a twist in the tax code to employ their spouse, and because of their benevolence as an employer, give their spouse a very full set of health insurance. Because today, if you're self-employed, your health insurance, you can only deduct 60% of your health insurance premiums, but companies that employ people and pay their health insurance premiums can deduct 100%. So there's a big imbalance there as well.
How many people are doing that?
I don't know. You know, I don't know if there's any way to quantify it.
Factoid in chapter 11. Small to mid-sized family businesses account for about 60% of all employment in the world. Surprise you?
A little bit. Because I think that we're conditioned to take as the norm whatever set of social circumstances we inherit. And so all of us, say, under the age of 70, or basically everybody in America today, essentially inherited this world of large organizations and industrial economy. And we take that as the norm, but in fact, I think it could go down as an aberration. It used to be, the industrial economy separated work and family. It used to be that you would work at your home, you would work with your family, and that was the norm. And the industrial economy cleaved that, and I think that free agents in many ways are repairing it. I work at home. There are tens of millions of people who work at home, and that creates a very different neighborhood life. It creates a very different family life, and I think it's mostly healthy. But it also, I think, is much more in tune with how human beings are wired. And that factoid is from a very interesting guy at the University of London named Nigel Nicholson, who is using some of the principles of evolutionary psychology to understand business today.
All right, I'm going to switch to the quote in chapter 12. If you have a job and get your health insurance through your employer, be thankful. It was never supposed to be this way.
Right. Again, this is a very similar point. We take as the norm in this country the idea that we get health insurance through our employers. But that is truly a historical accident. In the 1940s, there was a wage freeze. To get around the wage freeze, employers said, what can we do to lure people? We can't raise salaries. Let's give them something. Let's give them health insurance. So they gave them health insurance. And there are a couple of policy changes that harden that into the norm. First, the IRS determined that health insurance was not taxable income, even though it was a value that a worker was getting. And also, health insurance was fully deductible for employers. So in a very swiftly, getting health insurance through an employer became the norm in this country. There's no economic logic, there's no moral logic behind it. So that's why you can have this incredibly prosperous country, even in this downturn. This is a very prosperous country, but yet 41 million people without health insurance, because the way our health insurance system is structured and the way people actually work and live are increasingly at odds.
Factoid from chapter 13, African Americans make up 11% of the total workforce, but 22% of the temps. What's that say to you?
It says to me that at one part of the labor market, particularly temps, workers are getting a very, very bad deal. There were benefits to an organization man style of work. There was easy access to decent jobs that paid decent wages. And today in this economy, if you don't have skills and you don't have connections, you are in big trouble, whether you're a free agent or whether you're not. And often, the burden of this falls most heavily on low-income workers who are heavily racial minorities.
Now, as you see me go through all these factoids in this chapter, are you saying to yourself things like, this little plan of mine worked, the media is so lazy, they just go to the factoids? I mean, is that what you found has happened in your book?
No, I find that people have, very few people who have contacted me have at least admitted to having read only the box. But I find it useful. It's a useful way to have a conversation. There are many people, as I said, who read the book and say, oh, geez, what did he say in chapter 10? And they have an easy way to go to that box and find out what's going on.
All right.
I mean, I'm so grateful, Brian. If you were only the factoids, I'd be grateful to you.
Chapter 14, factoid. When Franklin Roosevelt established 65 as a standard U.S. retirement age, the average American life expectancy was 63. Today, life expectancy is 76 and rising.
Right.
What impact's that going to have to free agentry?
Well, I think that our notions of retirement are going to change. There are going to be more people like Grandma Betty who, instead of fully retiring, are going to work as part-time free agents. My father, who's 70, is an example of that. Other people in his generation are doing that. They've left big organizations and now are working as part-time free agents. And I think there are a whole host of reasons for that. One is that today, if you're 70 years old, you're really not that old. You've got a lot of good years left in you. And most people, I think, don't want to spend 20, 30 years playing canasta and shuffleboard. They want to do something that is more meaningful. They want to do something that is more engaging. And so I think that's one force in this. The other thing is that the demographic cohorts behind the baby boom are very small, and in a couple of decades we're going to run out of so-called working age people, and so there's going to be an incredible demand for retired baby boomers.
Running out of time, can't get all these factoids in. Here's another one, chapter 15. 40% of college students are now older than 25. 40% of college students are now older than 25. Right. Did that surprise you?
Sure, but it also shows that people are using college in fundamentally different ways. Workers are always looking for ways to sharpen their skills. They can do it through employers, but they can also do it through community colleges, and that's what a lot of people are doing today.
It's chapter 16, factoid. At any given moment during the workday, 70% of desks, offices, or workstations aren't occupied.
Sure. I mean, your desk is unoccupied right now because you're talking to me. My desk is unoccupied right now because I'm talking to you. I think that free agency is going to reshape commercial real estate and the way that offices are configured.
What about this one? This is the next chapter. A 1998 Arthur Anderson study found that 47% of entrepreneurs had financed their businesses with credit cards.
Yep. because there are very efficient capital markets for large companies. The capital markets for small entrepreneurs are much less efficient, but people are using their credit cards as a way to bootstrap their businesses.
So what is your reaction to the reaction you've gotten to your book?
I'm mostly pleased. The reviews have been, for the most part, quite good. And again, to me, what's most gratifying as an author is all of the email and phone calls and comments I get from people who read the book and said that they liked it, that it really explained their own lives, that it gave them a window onto the future.
Back to your time with Al Gore, why'd you leave?
I was tired. I was burnt out. I felt that I didn't have any control over my life.
What burns you out in a job like that?
Working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Literally?
But, working basically every day of the week. As a writer, you're on deadline all the time. And also being tethered to your beeper. Again, not being fully in control, because at any moment your beeper could go off and your Saturday afternoon is going to be spent typing a speech rather than doing something with your family.
What do you know about him that we don't?
He's an incredibly funny guy. He has an incredibly sharp and sophisticated sense of humor.
Why doesn't he let us see it?
You have to ask him that. I think part of it is that most politicians are not very funny. And so, because in order to be funny, I think you have to say things that people are thinking but aren't allowed to say. And politics is almost the opposite of that. You tend to give these banal blandishments that aren't particularly interesting but are utterly inoffensive.
Did you ever tell